Hi, welcome to Future Fast, and we have a very interesting guest today, and I'm sure you will sit up, and perhaps you already know because you saw the uh, poster and who we have. But before we bring him onto the conversation, I hope you're enjoying Future Fast, and if you're not subscribed to Future Fast yet, this is the time to do it. And having said that, let me just dive straight in. We have Thomas Frey. He is a world-renowned futurist, and perhaps most of you already are aware of them. And for those of you who are not aware, you are in the right place and right time because we are just going to meet Thomas Frey right here. Thomas, welcome to Future Fast, and thank you so much for making time to be here with us.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to be a guest on your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas, can you share your journey? Because I think most of us have follow you. We keep reading, listening to various things. But can you share your journey of how you got down to becoming the futurist that you are now today known as?
Yeah, I spent 15 years at IBM working as an engineer and designer. And one thing I was doing there is I was working as a human factors engineer, which is all about the man-machine interface. And I still think that's the biggest failure point in most startup businesses. They don't get the interface right. Um, so having a technology and making sure that people can use it and interact with it in a good way is that's the best way to make a successful product or to solve a problem successfully. Um, so I've been working from this vantage point for quite a few years, and I've been spending more time thinking about how we interface with the future, our relationship with the future. How does the future happen? How does it get created? Where is the future before we experience it? And then what happens to everything that we just experienced? Does that go into some giant trash bin? The old futures go into that trash bin. So it raises all kinds of interesting questions, which I'm absolutely certain we don't have any answers for yet. So I enjoy spending time thinking about where we're going, where we're headed. And most of what I focus in on is technology driven change. And how is this emerging technology that's coming out of the woodwork? How is that going to influence our lives? How is that going to change the way we do business? How is it going to change the way businesses interact with customers and people? All of these come into the forefront then. So that gives you a little bit of background. One of my claims to fame at IBM is that I received more awards there than any other engineer, which just means that I was really good at abusing all the systems that they had there. Um, so so if you're a person that has lots of ideas, you tend to be a lot of work for the people around you, and I was a lot of work. So
Well, what was the time you thought? Because traditionally, people work for a company, and you would want to work for a another larger company, or you want to go and start your own thing, or you want to work for a company which really is working on something more exciting. But what was the point that what was the trigger that got you to think that you should be the one to carry the telescope from a point of, you know seeing the future? What was that trigger?
yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Um, Actually, I left IBM in 1991, which ended up being a couple lifetimes ago. Um, Even when I was at IBM, I was starting businesses on the side. So over a 17-year period, I started 17 different businesses, and I thought I wish all of them would have been successful, but they weren't. Um, but then I decided that I needed something. I needed some vehicle to actually kind of be the umbrella for all of the projects I wanted to take on. And that's where I created the DaVinci Institute in 1997. And I set up the DaVinci Institute as a futurist think tank. And we surrounded ourselves with lots of intensely bright people. And we spent lots of time thinking about the future, asking questions about it, doing events surrounding it. We had the Da Vinci Inventor Showcase. So we had inventors coming in to display all of the products they were inventing. We had entrepreneurs coming in and talk about how they started their business. We had lots of events like that. And in the middle of all this, you start to get a sense as to how things are changing and what's important and what isn't important. And so we were trying to keep our finger on the pulse of all these changes, and that was all going pretty strong all the way up until COVID hit in 2020, and that was a big game changer at that point.
Well, you make it sound it's a very natural or organic thing that you became a futurist. But pardon me for saying this, but see, IBM is one of those traditional companies who was a listed company who operate from quarter to quarter, right? I mean, they're always uh, thinking of
Yeah,
what are we
you're
completing,
absolutely
what are we
right.
fulfilling, and most people, as as a as an employee, right? It is that you work on a paycheck, right? It's like start of the month, end of the month, new paycheck, project, project completion, and as you grow up the ladder, file your reports, compliance, and what are the projections for the next quarter. So, you work for 19 years there. And how is it? It must have been not so easy for you to just pluck yourself out of it and ta-da, and you're here.
Yeah, you're right. It was very challenging. Um, yeah, the last time I was at IBM, um, just walking down the hallways, I could feel the creativity getting sucked out of me. It's such a sterile environment, and I don't know how I managed to survive that long inside that environment. I um, I like to get rid of all the walls that are surrounding me. I like to think expansively, and I tend to change topics and go down rabbit holes and go off on tangents and with all the stuff that I'm doing, and that works. That served me very well after I started the Da Vinci Institute, and so that opened the doors for lots of other opportunities. Um, IBM, I think, was a good proving ground. It challenged me in certain ways, but at a certain point, I couldn't stay there any longer. So I had to open the door and explore what other options I had.
So, what were the learnings that you had from perhaps IBM or before that kind of helped you to, transition into visualizing the future the way that you do today, right? I mean, there
Yeah.
is that perhaps you got built it, right? It's not a miracle or a blessing that you received on one day after you walked out of IBM.
Yeah, it actually started before IBM. I was born and raised on a farm in South Dakota, and I spent my childhood driving around on a John Deere tractor around fields, um, with nothing to entertain myself other than my thoughts. And when you're out there alone with your thoughts, it causes you to do lots of things to keep your mind active, keep yourself entertained. Um, so I tell people that's what helped me master the fine art of contemplative thought. Now, I'm not even sure what contemplative thought is, and I'm not sure if I've mastered anything. All I know is that when you're out there just alone with your thoughts, something that young people today are never alone with their own thoughts. Um, yeah, that's a very different environment from what people are growing up in today.
True. Yeah, I guess today's distractions perhaps are different. But tell me how important it is for you to not to be wrong as a futurist.
Um, I don't think it's important at all. Um, you see, so we get into this debate about making predictions. Um, Back, it used to be that all the futurists would give a talk and they would make a series of predictions at the end, and then they would keep track of how many of their predictions were right, and then see, the thing is, when you make a prediction, you're virtually always wrong. There's some aspect of it's wrong. You get the timing wrong. You get some pieces of it wrong. Um, so uh, During Alvin Toffler's time, he was a great thinker, but he was so well known. He was so famous that when he made a prediction and it didn't come true, then the news media would climb all over him. And so he got to a point where he says, "Well, futurists really shouldn't be making predictions anymore." Um, I've actually hung on to that idea of still making predictions, but the idea that there's still value in a prediction, even though you're wrong, is really important, because I will, when I make a prediction, I draw your attention to some point in time in the future, and that forces you to draw your own conclusion. It might be some intersection in time that you've never spent any time thinking about, but by making that prediction, it forces you to think about it. And I think there's tremendous value in doing that. So even though you're wrong, I think that and when we think about the future, everything is keeps shifting and changing, and so we keep modifying things. And whether we're talking about flying drones or driverless cars, or whether we're talking about the city of the future, the house of the future, or whatever it might be, all of these things are constantly changing, and how we think about them is going to change as well. So, as an example, if you're designing some shoes for the future, this idea that you're thinking through every possibility of these shoes, and then all of a sudden this technology comes along that enables you to talk to your shoes. Well, that isn't something you really had incorporated into your prediction, because talking to your shoes, suddenly you can tell your shoes themselves to modify themselves in some way, and so that opens the door to a whole nother array of possibilities. So each of these things is it's very fluid. We're changing things as we go, but to the extent that we can get just a little bit better at making decisions, that gives us tremendous advantage over the competition. So the key thing here is that these images of the future that we hold in our heads are what how we make decisions today. So if we change that vision of the future that we have in our head, we change the way we make decisions. And that's how I justify the things that I do, because in the corporate world, people are making multi-billion-dollar decisions, and having just a little bit clearer vision of what that might be around the corner gives them a huge advantage.
Correct. Totally. But Thomas, I'm just curious. When you're obviously the kind of person who pretty much lives in the future from a point of at everything, right? You said shoes. Probably you look at yourself and look at your shirt and think, perhaps what would it be in future? What kind of a clothing you're wearing? So so much you live in the future. How do you reconcile your present? Is there a conflict? Have you got into some times that where am I? Does that happen to you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Um, sometimes I'm not paying attention. My wife accuses me of that a lot. Uh, um, yeah, the yeah, everything that I have to pay attention to the here and now, because if I'm driving a car, as an example, I don't want to drive into another car or drive into the ditch or something.
Correct.
Um, so yeah, there is that constant conflict between wanting to think about the future and actually being in the here and now.
So how do you bring yourself to the present? I mean, is there something you do? I mean, something like a meditation or yoga, something you do to bring yourself to present, or is that uh, your people in your surroundings have to knock on you to get you to? I mean, that's how you. I mean,
Yeah. Actually, I've created this course called Future Like a Boss, and it goes through a number of futuring techniques that enable me to think about the future in unique and different ways. And so each of them comes at the future from a different vantage point. Um, so if you want to actually construct a grand vision of the future, you need to look at it from so many different angles, um, and understand what the signals are that you're getting from the future. You need to, as you'll find these little situational events that you can just plug in and say, well, I'm pretty sure that's how people are going to be watching television 20 years from now. I'm pretty sure this is how people are still going to be working from home 20 years from now, and they're going to have this set of equipment. Um, and and so then I'm pretty sure people are still going to need to get across town. And then you start piecing all of these things together. And then each one of them is like this pixel on them, this master canvas that you're trying to paint this image of the future. So these techniques I rely quite heavily on.
right. And how much of a role does history or the past plays in your process of visualizing the future?
It's hugely important. If you don't know where we've come from, then we don't know where we're going to go. Um, yeah, it's super important to understand history and how these things have changed and evolved up to this point. And so I'm a great student of history. Um,
But
yes,
we study history from a linear point of view, right? And future is so non-linear. So how do you break out of the coming from linearity to the non-linear? How do you
yeah.
transition yourself or your thinking?
Um, well, you create these timelines. You create timelines from the past. It might be 1,000 years ago to 800 years, 600, 400, 200, and then to today. And then you go 200 years in the future, or I mean, even going 10 years in the future based on what was happening, 100 years ago. Everything's speeded up now. So what took 100 years to change in the past is probably only going to take 10 years now to change. Um, uh, so as an example, when you go back in history and say, did the ancient Romans actually have offices back in the days of the Colosseum? And what did they do in those offices? And as it turns out, they didn't really have offices. They had meeting spaces, but they didn't really have offices the way we think of them today. And so then you go back in and you try to figure out, okay, well, when did the office come about and why was it important for people to have individual offices? And is it still going to be important for people to have offices in the future? Um, and if they're going to be working from their home, what do our homes need to look like? What features need to be built into that home? As an example, if you have kids at home, you need to isolate your workspace from all the kids running and screaming and having fun. And so that's important. And then also this idea of being connected, like you and I are connected right now, uh, completely on the other sides of the world. And 20 years ago, that would have seemed impossible. Um, so all of these things, you're constantly bringing historical context to everything you're doing right now.
Right. So, is there a particular method you have designed for yourself from this? Like how you said that you do tend to look back to 10 years, 100 years, and then is that you created some kind of a framework for yourself to do this?
Well, I'll tell you one tool that I use that I find highly effective. It's what I call question mapping. And if as an example you have a question that you start with and you don't have an answer for it, then you can start asking questions surrounding that initial question. And then you can start building more questions around that. Each question leads to another question, leads to another question. By the time you're done mapping out all these questions, you get really close to the answer that you're looking for. As an example, if this idea of are we still going to have offices in office buildings 20 years from now, you start with asking questions about the who, what, when, where, how, why, and then you start getting into what came before and what comes after, and then that opens the door for just tons of other questions surrounding it, and that I find to be extremely useful because you'll start going off onto tangents and start going into areas that you didn't think that you were interested in, and by the time you're done, you'll have uncovered this whole rich, bountiful set of ideas and you're gonna step back and say, "Wow, I never thought about that in the past. Now I got a whole another area to go into here."
So, by what you're saying, Thomas, visualizing future in the way you're putting it is more a scientific process rather than a creative process. But how would you define it? Do you think it's a scientific process or a creative process, or do you see something in between?
Yeah, it's very much a scientific process. It doesn't define itself in clear mathematics like engineering or material science, things like that. But there are a number of tools that you can use, just like in any other profession, and whether those tools happen to be a formula or whether it happens to be some methodology that you're using to get there, those tools are what opened the door for lots of other things to happen. See, the way I look at it right now is that a person with a toolbox is more valuable than somebody without a toolbox. Somebody with a robot is going to be more valuable than somebody without, and somebody with AI is going to be more valuable than somebody without. So each of these things just opens the door for another set of tools, another set of things that you can use. And
Right.
so in the future, somebody that has the full set of AI, automation, quantum computing, all of that empowers this person and amplifies their capabilities in so many interesting ways. And I see AI being kind of the greatest amplifier of all. That's the one that's going to give us massive, huge advantages. And will it eliminate a lot of jobs? Well, I think it's going to actually create tons and tons of new jobs. It will open the door for lots of startup entrepreneurs to create tons of new things. So that I think a lot of people will have to learn new skills along the way, but
Right.
there's going to be more than enough opportunity for employment, though.
Right. Sorry for just one step back again. How much of do you consider as being scientific, and how much of it as a creative person? I'm just trying to get my head around this. Well, I think as much as you need to think scientifically and have a process approach, I also think one needs to be extremely creative to do it. So, but how would you consider yourself? How much of you is creative and how much of you is scientific?
Yeah, it's 38.7% scientific and the rest is creative. Is that specific enough? I'm just kidding.
Oh, that was brilliant. I think in cricketing language, we would say you just got me a leg before the wicket. So, wonderful. But
Yeah,
is there a logic to the 36.7 or did you say 38.7?
yeah, that's a plucked from air number.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
but I do think that there's lots of science in the background
Sure.
that you draw from, and it's good that you question the science all the time. Um, Everything that we've been taught is subject to change. Uh,
Absolutely.
I remember as a kid growing up and seeing all these dots in the sky, all the stars up there, and I thought, oh, there are just all these different planets up there. And then once we have the telescopes that we can actually see clearly out into space, and we see, wow, there's a whole lot more out there than we were thinking. And it's not just little dots in the sky. It's vast arrays, these collisions happening in space of planets running into the one sun running into another one and causing all these supernovas. All of this stuff just suddenly became quite apparent as soon as we had a better way of looking at the world around us.
So true.
And so that's the same with thinking about the future. As we get closer and closer to it, it begins to kind of take shape and take form. And then we say, oh, now what can I do with that? That's a whole different ballgame now. I don't know if you've played around with any of the AI programs, but Mid-Journey is a graphics program. You put in certain words, and then you can watch it form these images
Correct.
at 10%, 20%, 30%. And as it forms, it's very similar. Then you're starting to get a little bit clearer view of what's happening. I think that's kind of how we're visualizing the future.
Wow, wonderful. Can you share us about DaVinci Institute? I mean, you did mention briefly from your journey point of view. Can you share what do you do at DaVinci Institute? Why DaVinci Institute?
Yeah. Well, DaVinci was one of my, I think he's the world's best known futurist, actually. DaVinci dedicated over 500 drawings and 35,000 words to the concept of flying. And this is, I don't know, 400 years before the first airplane took off, 300 years before the first hot air balloon flight. So he was a true visionary. At the time, nobody actually thought people could fly. So Da Vinci is a world recognizable name. That's why when I found that the name was available, I grabbed it right away. So that made good sense to do that. So at the Da Vinci Institute, we've transitioned kind of the business model quite a few times along the way. At one point, we were doing lots of consulting work. I'd been doing quite a bit of speaking at different countries. Leading up to COVID, I was going to 8 to 10 countries a year. That would put me in touch with people in countries all over the place, and lots of different interesting perspectives when you go to these different countries. As everything kept evolving, then at one point we decided to start a coding school. So in 2012 we started Da Vinci Coders, and that was that was the second school in the country that actually operated like that. It was a fast track course in how to get people who wanted to move into the coding world a path to getting there. And so we operated that for 5 years. And in 2000, we were the second school in the country when we started. After 5 years, there was over 750 schools around the country that had cropped up, and the market became saturated, and everything changed then. So we shifted into a co-working space. So we had a large space, and we brought in lots of startup companies. And these startup companies were quite interesting. We had a game design studio. We had a startup company that just focused on engineering tunneling projects around the world. We had a drone agriculture company in there. And we were learning as much from them as they were from us as we were going along. And so all of these things kept evolving. And then when COVID came along, then we ended up changing it. And so we've downsized considerably. And now we're just a small fraction of what we were. And so we're working our way back up again.
And do you want to talk about the kind of people? Of course, you did mention DaVinci as being one of the people who have inspired you, but are there other people that have inspired you? And also, perhaps you could say that what you do is, and their contribution is significantly there for whatever you do today or you become. Are there, what kind of people you think would have contributed to your being what you are today?
I've always been a big fan of Alvin Toffler. I like the things that John Nesbitt was doing, and there's everything from Marvin Minsky to Steve Jobs to now the stuff that Elon Musk is doing. I find Mark Andreessen to be just absolutely fascinating in his way of having you think about things from a totally different perspective. There's a number of people that I tend to follow, there's no. So I consider all of these people as influencers. I don't consider them ones that I follow lock, stock, and barrel. That Peter Diamandis is a person that I really admire.
Singularity University.
Right. And he does a podcast with Dan Sullivan that is quite remarkable. They get into some just the commentary that they go through is quite ingenious. So those are a few of them.
Oh, in fact, that was my next question. Can you recommend some books or podcasts to our listeners and audience?
What is the future, or what does technology want? That's a good one. That is by by Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly was the founder of Wired magazine. That's exceptionally good. I'm really looking forward to the book that Walter Isaacson's writing on Elon Musk. I think that will give insights into his life, but I think understanding him from the outside in is radically different than understanding him from the inside out. He has radically changed so many industries that people had long thought were not possible to change. But that was quite impressive. I wish I had the list of books in front of me. don't at the moment. I'll mention them as they come to mind here.
Yes, please. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing your journey and all your perspectives and how and why you think the way you think, and also the 36.7% of scientific thinking that goes into future prediction, with the rest being creative. Thank you so much, and to the audience and listeners, I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. And please feel free to share this conversation across, and do quickly come back, because we're going to have more conversation with Thomas Frey. And till we meet again, enjoy the ride.